The first-generation Tiguan petrol engines are either 1.4 TSI or 2.0 TSI. They say different things about them, but current operating experience shows that any of them, especially if the car was manufactured after 2012, can be taken. Older versions can also be considered if the engine has been properly maintained and chains, tensioners, and a number of other parts that have survived several revisions have been replaced. 1.4 TSI Twincharger BWK, CAVA, CTHA 150 horsepower. 1.4 TSI Twincharger CAVD 160 horsepower. From the very beginning of sales, the junior gasoline engine for the Tiguan was the 1.4 TSI engine with 150 horsepower. This means that it is equipped with both a turbine and a Roots-type drive supercharger. By and large, everyone is dissuading you from buying a VW with a twin-charger engine. We advise you to be extremely careful when choosing a car with such a unit, especially before the 2012 model year. The motor must be dry at all seals and the turbine. Make diagnostics at a specialized service. And during operation, change the oil every 8,000 kilometers. Listen to the chain, keep the crankcase ventilation system clean and fill with 98 grade gasoline or proven 95 grade gasoline. Over time, be prepared for problems with valves N249 and N75. Each of them controls boost in its own way. 1.4 TSI CAXA 122 horsepower. Since October 2010, the regular 1.4 TSI with one turbine appeared on Tigans. Believe it or not, this is a very reliable engine. We have a separate full review of it. What can be disappointing about it, as well as its twin-turbo sibling, is a cracked exhaust manifold. Because since the exhaust manifold is a single part with the hot scroll of the turbine, replacing the manifold actually means replacing the turbine. In the best case, you can save money by purchasing a used collector separately. The turbine may also be bothered by leakage of antifreeze through the tubes connected to its cartridge. The bypass valve flap in the hot part may wear out, and oil fogging may appear on the pipes connected to the cold part. All this can be solved and does not threaten serious expenses if you contact the service station in time. There should be no problems with chains on 1.4 TSI engines. Since 2012, all the shortcomings of the chain drive have been resolved, and earlier engines received new chains, sprockets and tensioners. 2.0 TSI CAWA, CCTB 170 horsepower. 2.0 TSI CAWB, CCTA 200 horsepower. Tiguan's 2-liter turbo engines belong to the EA 888 Generation 1 family. They consume oil from the assembly line. In order not to aggravate it, the oil needs to be changed every 7,500 kilometers or more often if you operate the car in city traffic jams. Despite all its technology and strong cast iron cylinder block, this engine readily begins to leak oil over the seals at high mileage. And usually the culprit is a burst oil separator membrane. You can check the operation of the VKG system in this way. Start the engine and unscrew the oil filler plug. If the engine continues to operate normally, and air even comes out of the neck, then the VKV valve needs to be replaced. Normally, during such a check, the engine should rev up and almost stall. You need to buy the latest revision of the oil separator, 06H103-495H. The original costs about $150. If fogging appears on the rear crankshaft oil seal in the joint between the engine and transmission, it's wet, then triple of the engine may also appear, because a working crankcase ventilation system will begin to suck air through a leaky crankshaft oil seal. Another problem with the 2.0 TSI engine is due to dirty injectors, tired ignition coils and worn spark plugs. The bypass valve, aka wastegate, in the hot part of the turbine on this engine can also ring, but due to wear on the actuator linkage joint, there are not so rare cases when the red oil can lights up on the instrument panel. Low oil pressure is caused by broken meshes in the balancer shaft bearings of the 2.0 TSI engine. It is necessary to lay up the car as soon as possible and carry out expensive repairs with the replacement of both balancer shafts. The timing chain of a 2.0 TSI engine lasts about 100,000 kilometers. When purchasing a car with this engine, it is highly advisable to evaluate the protrusion of the tensioner rod through the inspection window in the timing case. If the rod reaches 6 notches, you need to change the chain. The 2.0 TSI engine pump is driven by a separate belt from the left balancer shaft, on the flywheel side. The original pump, 06H121026DR, costs under $400. It has to be replaced due to antifreeze leakage through the body, which is sometimes associated with cracking of its plastic body. There are also swirl flaps in the intake manifold of the 2-liter turbo engine. Errors in their position usually occur due to the drive rod jumping off the actuator. It is also possible that the damper position sensor may fail and become loose with air leaks. In general, you need to be on alert with the 2.0 TSI engine. Although all of the problems listed will stretch out and happen once over 200,000 or more kilometers. 2.0 TSI CCZC 170 horsepower, 2.0 TSI CCZB 211 horsepower. Since May 2011, second-generation EA888 engines appeared under the hood of the Tiguan. They were available on the European market and are rarely found here. And 1.8 TSI CEAA 160 horsepower. It is very rare to find a 1.8-liter turbo engine on Tigans. This motor also belongs to the second-generation EA888, and the car itself was intended for sales on the European market. 2.0 TDI CFFD, CUVE 110 horsepower, 2.0 TDI CBAB CFFB 140 horsepower, 2.0 TDI CBBA 163 horsepower, 2.0 TDI CBBB 170 horsepower, 2.0 TDI CFGC 177 horsepower. The Tiguan had only one diesel engine, a 2-liter diesel engine of the EA189 family with common rail. Early versions of this engine were equipped with Bosch piezo injectors, but since 2011 the fuel system has been updated and the injectors have become electromagnetic. To prevent these diesel engines from dying from oil starvation due to the oil pump stopping, it is necessary to change the hexagon of its drive at least once every 100,000 kilometers. This is true for motors manufactured before November 3, 2009, where the length of the hexagon, 03G115-281D, is 77 mm. Then the length of the hexagon was increased to 100 mm, 03G115-281E. The risk of turning off the oil pump disappeared completely. But some owners prefer to change this cheap part every 200,000 kilometers. Overall, 2.0 TDI diesel engines are an excellent choice. Check the exact power by the letter designation of the motor on the sticker. Keep in mind that such engines are not bought for short mileage, so it is worth checking the actual mileage on the car's electronic units and comparing it with data on engine hours. Even on diesel Tigans, the contacts in the electrical connector that supplies the submersible fuel pump burn out. Because of this, an error is recorded for low pump performance. The engine goes into emergency mode and barely runs. The problem can be eliminated by cleaning and tightening the contacts. It is better to replace the burnt terminals in the 4-terminal chip. The Tiguan's manual transmissions are fine. 2-pedal versions are represented by both the classic Japanese automatic and several versions of the DSG preselective DQ200 0AM 0CW 7-speed preselective gearbox. The DQ200 dry 7-speed transmission is a first of its kind. At first, it was very rare on Tigans, only on front-wheel drive versions with the most powerful 1.4 TSI Twincharger and on even rarer ones with the 1.8 TSI engine. Then, with the advent of the 122 horsepower 1.4 TSI, it became its optional companion. This transmission created many problems, but in 2012 it was improved, and all earlier cars were brought to life. Large-scale recall campaigns were carried out more than once. In general, if you come across a restyled front-wheel drive Tiguan with a 1.4 TSI engine, 122 horsepower, with a DSG transmission, then you can consider it. Especially if such a car was purchased from a VW dealer and has a service history. Such versions were sold in large quantities by domestic dealers. Before purchasing or simply during operation, it is possible and necessary to diagnose this transmission. In this case, diagnostics is not reading errors, but studying the actual operating parameters of this transmission. The diagnostician must know and understand that when diagnosing the DQ200, he should be interested in the working pressure in the hydraulic system and its probable jumps beyond normal limits, i.e. from 42 to 60 bar. The clearance in the clutch along the course of its rods is also studied, by which the condition of the clutch discs and their deformation can be assessed. Separately, you can view the temperature conditions of the clutch and even the friction coefficients. Usually the dual clutch of this 7-speed, the DSG lasts about 200,000 kilometers before wearing out. The cost of the clutch, 0AM 198 142F, of course, is unpleasantly disappointing, up to $1,500. In a dry DQ200 you need to change the oil, 1 liter of oil costing $22, G00400M2 goes into its hydraulic system, another 2 liters of branded mineral water at $35 per can, G0525512A2 is filled into the gearbox. DQ250-02E0D9 6-speed preselective gearbox, all-wheel drive on Tigans is combined with wet DSG. Powered by the 1.4-liter engine is the DQ250, and we've got an in-depth review of that powertrain. This transmission appeared in 2003 and, one might say, was immediately reliable. But still, you shouldn't relax. You also need to diagnose it if there are any doubts about the adequacy of its operation, although the parameters for reading are much smaller than those of a dry DSG. But specialized experts will figure it out. Every 60,000 kilometers it needs to change a special oil, GO52182A2. For $40 per liter, 5 liters are needed. There's non-original oil, for $80 for a 5-liter canister. The filter and its gasket must also be replaced, O2E305051C. Some owners install a standard enlarged heat exchanger, O2E409061C, from charged VAG models with this transmission. Such a part will cost $250. There are substitutes for half the price. In general, the DQ250, with long-term and adequate use, seems more attractive than the dry DQ200. Note that you shouldn't drift it and skid aggressively, because the differential may not hold up. DQ500 0BH, 0BT 7-speed preselective gearbox. Another wet DSG. The DQ500 works with 2-liter engines. It has one more gear, and it itself is considered the most reliable of all the transverse preselectives from VAG. It is serviced and diagnosed in the same way as the younger DQ250. The older DQ500 is reliable, but if used improperly, the 2-mass flywheel plate can break, which will be immediately indicated by a characteristic metallic rustle or rumble. By the way, absolutely all versions of the first Tiguan, except one, are equipped with dual-mass flywheels. There are no particular complaints about their resource. But these parts do not last forever. For runs of more than 300,000 kilometers, you will have to pay about $1,500 for an original flywheel or half as much for a branded replacement. Aisin TF6209G/09M 6-speed automatic transmission. Most often, with 2-liter engines on the aftermarket, you will come across a Tiguan with a conventional 6-speed. Automatically. Such configurations were sold in parallel with versions with DSG, but were intended for sale by our official dealers. The same practice was in the USA. As a rule, a 170 horsepower gasoline engine and a 140 horsepower diesel engine will come with an Aisin transmission. There is no dual mass flywheel here. The transmission itself is not as efficient as the DSG, but also less troublesome. It is also usually cheaper when overhauled. Just change the ATF in it every 60,000 kilometers. A partial replacement requires 4 liters of ATF, GO55025A2, at $40 per liter, but it has plenty of analogs at much more reasonable prices. The oil filter, O9G325429A, $77, is available for replacement with the pan removed. By the way, the Tiguan has a separate forward automatic transmission cooling radiator. Make sure it is clean. At high mileage, an error may appear on the radiator fan, indicating a power failure. In this case, the fan will not work at speed 1. In this case, you will have to replace the fan with a new one. The original, 1K09595455FR, will cost over $400, but there are many replacements for $100. The air conditioner radiator is located in the first row behind the bumper, so it is defenseless against being hit by road stones and dirt. Often it becomes tightly clogged with dirt, the ribs of its honeycomb are deformed and everything ends in through corrosion. Radiators need to be kept clean. It is advisable to place a mesh in the air intakes opposite the radiators. On Tiguans with automatic transmission, the upper gearbox support is rather weak. It breaks, becomes loose and begins to creak literally every 60,000 kilometers. Along with this, kicks and jolts appear when you engage forward or reverse. Owners have found that the hydraulic mount, 8J01995555D, from the Audi TT and Passat CC lasts much longer. You will have to pay about $200 for it. Owners of all-wheel drive Tigans with a diesel engine should be aware that the outboard bearing of the propeller shaft on their cars is not protected in any way and will soon begin to hum due to the grease that has dried out in it and the grease that has filled up in its place. In general, the engineers saved money and removed the heat shield from the bottom of all-wheel drive diesel Tigans. You can buy it separately. 5N0521 a new one costs $125, where you can look for it at a disassembly site along with fasteners. The original driveshaft hanger bearing is not for sale, and good replacements cost about $200. Without protection or preventive lubrication, the outboard bearing lasts about 120,000 kilometers. On a Tiguan with high mileage, you need to monitor the condition of the rear elastic coupling of the driveshaft. It happens that it breaks off while driving. The original flexible coupling, 1K0521307A, today costs about $700. Normal quality substitutes, from $230. The driveshaft rotates constantly, but the 4th generation Haldex electro-hydraulic coupling is responsible for its connection to the rear gearbox, that is, for connecting the rear axle. It simply needs to change the oil and filter every 60,000 kilometers or even more often, otherwise its pump will fail. A liter of original oil, G055175A2, costs about $50, but you need to look for a filter using the Volvo part number 31,325,173, because VAB still doesn't offer it. The oil in the rear gearbox is changed separately. In no case should it be confused with the oil for the Haldex clutch. In general, when replacing 1 liter G052145S2 of transmission oil is placed in the rear and front gearboxes. It also costs about $50 per jar. In the angular gearbox transfer case of all-wheel drive versions, once every 120,000 kilometers you need to update about a liter of oil of a different type, G052145S2, then another $60 per can. The clamp connecting the two parts of the muffler rusts much faster than the muffler itself. Usually it simply cracks and exhaust gases begin to leak through the crack. The original clamp 1KO253141N costs about $35. The Tiguan is equipped with electromechanical parking brake servos. Over time, dirt accumulates under the plastic covers of these mechanisms, which leads to wear of the gearbox splines. And in winter, due to moisture, gearboxes can freeze. It may all end with the crossover simply not being removed from the handbrake. If you crawl under the car and remove the servos from the rear brake calipers, you can drive. New original servos, 3C0998-281A, cost $170. There are many cheaper substitutes. There are many conflicting reviews regarding the mileage of the Tiguan suspension. For some, all the silent blocks cracked before a mileage of 100,000 kilometers. For others, they took care of them up to 200,000 kilometers. Most likely, silent blocks and much more will be replaced with non-original ones in 2023. Pay attention to the rear silent blocks of the front control arms. They are installed in removable consoles. The original silent blocks, 3C0199-231E, have 2 slots for elasticity. The original ones cost $45. Instead, for significantly greater mileage, you can install all rubber and stiffer silent blocks from the Audi TTRS 8J0199-231, although they cost twice as much. You can also find reinforced non-original ones without slots. The struts, 1K0411-315R, of the front stabilizer can travel 60,000 kilometers. The original will cost $30. Front stabilizer bushings are not sold separately, instead substitutes are purchased, the choice of which is huge. The support bearings 6N0412-249E of the front shock absorbers last a long time, creak when worn, and today are inexpensive, $25. Front wheel bearings 8J0598-625 are expensive, $300 each, and may require replacement every 100,000 kilometers. There are cases when corrosion eats away at the torsion bar of the rear stabilizer, so it breaks in half. There is nothing surprising in this, because it's hollow. The new rear stabilizer, 3C0511-409A, comes in 2 sizes in terms of cross-section and wall thickness. The original costs $130, but you can always find a stabilizer at a disassembly. The rear suspension of front and all-wheel drive Tigans differs mainly in wheel axles. The lower arms, spring-loaded boats, often suffer from corrosion, so when it comes time to repress their silent blocks from the subframe side, their eyes may burst. Surprisingly, these original levers, 1K0505-311AB, are inexpensive today, $110. The price for the front silent blocks, 1K0505-541D, of the wishbones is also encouraging, $15. Upper transverse, 1K0505-323N, rods $85 original. It is not so uncommon for Tigans to develop corrosion on the rear fenders and arches along the junction with the rear bumper. In general, dirt and sand get into this gap, which slowly rubs the paint down to the metal. The metal remains unprotected and rusts. By the way, rust most often appears on Tigans assembled in Russia. After removing the bumper, the whole picture will be visible. More extensive pockets of corrosion are hidden precisely along the line where the side of the bumper joins the wing and arch. No matter how much you repaint, corrosion will appear here in a few years. It's better to repaint it well once and apply an armor film to the paint at this joint so that the sand does not rub off the paint. Also, according to the glorious tradition of Volkswagen bodies from the 2000s, the paint near the door handles bursts and falls off in whole flakes. The metal on the wheel arches under the plastic covers near the mounting holes is also being wiped. We have to repaint the wings because of paint blisters along these same trims. In general, if an inspection with a thickness gauge reveals an increased layer of paint, something more than 140 microns on the wings, then most likely the previous owners carried out cosmetic repairs. Otherwise, everything is fine with the body and paint, although a lot depends on operating conditions. In salty city winters, you can expect corrosion to appear along the lower edges of all doors and on the thresholds in places where they are rubbed by dirt flying from under the wheels. Chips on the hood and above the upper edge of the windshield are usually only covered with a superficial layer of red patina. Excessive rust on any body parts indicates an accident and body repairs in the past. If bugs appear from under the moldings, then most likely the body has rarely been washed from harsh road reagents. Over the years of operation, electronic failures appear or simply glitches caused by shedding of the braid on the wires. At risk are wires in bundles at bends and doorways. Wires crumble, break, and electrical mechanisms in the doors stop working. Also, limit switches in doors fail with age, after which the machine believes that the corresponding door is not closed. The end caps can be replaced with any other suitable ones. It is not necessary to buy original ones. There are cases where the carpet gets wet under the navigator's feet. This is due to the fact that water flows into the cabin through the holes located in the navigation door pillar. If you move the upholstery away from this rack, that is, at the level of the hinges, you will find both technological holes and water accumulated in the niche of this rack. The water needs to be drained. Then it is advisable to remove the right front fender and locker. All holes that you see there should be closed with plugs. Also inspect the sealant at the junction of the body parts in the same wheel arch. There should be no gaps or cracks there. Seal everything with sealant. Install plugs to prevent water from entering the interior. If the Tiguan is equipped with a panoramic roof, then you need to clean the drainage pipes laid from the sliding section down the roof pillars. Otherwise, one day water will spill into the cabin through the ceiling. The Tiguan was not spared the problem of a broken accelerator pedal joint. This machine and its numerous companions have a floor pedal. The hinge at the bottom of the pedal is something like a piano hinge. It happens that in winter weather, snow stuck to the driver's shoes gets under the pedal and freezes into a lump overnight. Therefore, in the morning when you press the pedal, its hinge breaks off. In general, you have to either buy a used pedal or make a hinge. The stove fan may creak over time, which can be treated by removing it, disassembling it, cleaning and lubricating it. Sometimes it is necessary to replace the entire fan. 3C1-820-015Q. The original one costs over $500, but there are many substitutes that are 5 times cheaper. By the way, on Tiguan since 2012, both the wiring and the fan have become more durable, but the dampers in the air ducts and the depths of the front panel can become dysfunctional over time. They are indicated by specific diagnostic errors. If some buttons on the steering wheel stop working, then you need to change the steering column cable. However, all these minor breakdowns are typical for any car.